I was bankrupt inside when I saw 47 Muslims surrounded at the exact moment of the adhan. The guns were raised. No one ran. And then the sky responded in a way no chart could ever explain. My name is Adam Reynolds. I'm 50 years old, and I'm from the United States. For decades, my life revolved around numbers, profits, and goals. I measured my worth by the size of my bank account and believed happiness was a matter of status. The more I earned, the emptier I felt inside, though I never admitted that to anyone. Today, looking back, I see that my financial collapse was actually the beginning of my freedom. I had to lose everything to finally hear the voice of God calling me through someone who didn't even know me. Before I continue with my story of conversion, write in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this testimony is reaching. The fall didn't happen all at once. It crept in like a slow tide disguised as small ripples. At first it seemed like just another market fluctuation. I had faced crises before and always come out on top, but this time something was different. The numbers began bleeding quietly. A risky tech investment failed, an international partnership collapsed, and what had started as a minor loss turned into an avalanche I couldn't stop. The meetings, once filled with applause and optimistic projections, were replaced by cold stares and unanswered emails. I used to walk in wearing a flawless suit, radiating the confidence of someone who believed he controlled his own destiny. Now, every step through the halls of my own company sounded like the echo of a crumbling empire. The glass walls that once symbolized transparency and power now reflected nothing but a drained man trying to save what was already lost. The headlines came quickly. American executive loses millions in Asian operation. Imminent bankruptcy threatens international group. The words failure and mistake began to haunt even my dreams. But the worst part wasn't losing the money. It was losing the respect of those around me. The same people who once called me a genius were the first to vanish. The phone stopped ringing. The invitations disappeared. Loneliness arrived without warning, and with it, silence. I tried to keep up appearances for a while. I sold assets, renegotiated debts, convincing myself I could still turn things around. But deep down, I knew it was over. Every decision I made only dragged me deeper into the abyss. When the lawyers informed me that my main company would be liquidated, I just nodded and said, "It's fine." It was a lie. Nothing was fine. That was when I decided to run away. From the newspapers, the meetings, the shame. I took the first flight to Kuala Lumpur, thinking distance might numb the pain. But pain travels in the same suitcase you do. The difference was that far from everything that once defined me, I finally had to face who I was without the titles or the money. My first night in Malaysia was a shock. The hotel room was small, stuffy, and windowless. The lights flickered, and the air conditioner made an irritating noise. There, alone, I realized I had never learned how to live without control. For the first time, I had nothing to manage except my own emptiness. I felt overwhelming anger, at myself, at the world, and at a God I had never taken seriously, but now blamed for everything. In the days that followed, I wandered the city like a stranger. I watched people in the streets, smiling vendors, elderly men sitting on sidewalks, barefoot children playing. They all seemed to possess something I had never known, peace. And it was in that contrast between my ruin and their quiet serenity that the first crack in my pride began to appear. I didn't know it yet, but in that distant country, a man who had almost nothing would become the instrument God used to show me what it truly means to have everything. I woke up early that day, more from insomnia than motivation. The humid Malaysian heat clung to my skin and weighed on my spirit. I took a taxi to a meeting I knew would lead nowhere. The car was old, the seats worn, and the air was thick with a mix of incense and dust. The driver was a middle-aged man with a grey beard and calm eyes. His badge hanging from the dashboard showed his name, Rahim. He greeted me with an "Assalamu alaikum" and a smile that didn't feel professional but genuine. I simply nodded, distracted, lost in a fog of calculations and regrets. On the radio, a soft voice was reciting something in Arabic. It wasn't music, but there was a melody, something that seemed to touch a place inside me I didn't know existed. Rahim noticed my interest and explained calmly, "It's the Quran." He said it with such reverence that I couldn't bring myself to interrupt. As we drove, we started talking. He asked what had brought me to Malaysia, and without thinking, I replied, "Failure." He let out a gentle laugh, not mocking but understanding. "Sometimes," he said, "God has to break the vessel to show what's inside it." I stayed silent. It was the first time anyone had spoken to me about God without trying to prove anything, without preaching, without quoting religion. Rahim kept driving peacefully while I watched him through the rearview mirror. There was no rush in his movements, no anxiety in his gaze. When the light turned red, he switched off the engine and used the time to pray quietly, moving his lips in silence. His serenity unsettled me and yet drew me in. "You seem so calm, even with this traffic, this heat, this chaos. How do you manage?" I asked, almost in a confession. He looked into the mirror and replied, his voice light but firm, "When you have Allah, you never lose." I was speechless. The simplicity of that phrase hit me with the force of an ancient truth, impossible to argue against. He didn't elaborate, didn't say another word. He just went back to driving as if he had already said everything that mattered. We arrived at my destination. When I got out, Rahim smiled and wished me a good day, but that day would never be the same again. His words kept echoing inside me like a steady beat, impossible to ignore. In that simple taxi, amid the city's noise and the distant sound of Arabic recitation, something quietly shifted within me. Without realizing it, I had just found the first sign that my downfall wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a calling. Before continuing, I want to say that during this time, I learned Allah asks us to care not only for our faith, but also for the body He entrusted to us. That's why I want to recommend something that can help, a practical guide to healthy living, including how to maintain discipline, energy, and balance. And as a bonus, it also includes a special guide on ruqya and spiritual protection, to strengthen not only the body, but also the heart. The link is pinned in the first comment, available for a symbolic price, because what truly matters is that this message reaches those who really need it. I went back to the hotel carrying not only my suitcase, but also a weight that felt impossible to let go of. The taxi was long gone, but Rahim's words stayed lodged inside me like an echo that wouldn't fade. "Whoever has Allah never loses." I repeated it silently, as if trying to decipher a riddle. I lay on the narrow bed in the stuffy room, but sleep wouldn't come. The ceiling fan spun slowly and noisily as I stared at the cracks above, searching for answers. It wasn't just about religion, it was about the foundation of my life. How could someone who had so little possess such unshakable certainty, while I, who once held unimaginable wealth, was completely adrift? The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it hit me. The images of the taxi, Rahim's calm eyes, and even the soft sound of the Quran on the radio seemed to have settled inside me. It felt as though I was being called to something, though I didn't know where. I spent hours replaying my life in my mind. I remembered meetings in skyscrapers, the signing of million-dollar contracts, the private jet flights. All of it, what once seemed eternal, had collapsed without warning. And now, lying in a modest hotel, I felt I was standing at an invisible crossroads. It was no longer about saving my fortune, but about saving something I hadn't even realized was lost, my soul. I got up and went to the window. The city slept under a damp haze, lit by yellow streetlights reflecting on the wet asphalt from the night before. The street was silent, but inside me there was a deafening noise. It was as if my own conscience were asking, "What do you really have?" For the first time I had the courage to answer, "Nothing." I picked up my phone and started searching. I typed Allah, then Quran, then Muslim faith. I had no plan, no intention of converting. I just wanted to understand. I read articles, forums, personal stories. I found accounts of people who had left everything behind to follow a spiritual path. Some spoke of peace, others of sacrifice, but all of them seemed to have found something I never had, meaning. I put the phone down, but the question kept pounding in my head. How could a man who drives a taxi all day, who probably lives in a small house, carry more inner security than I, who spent years managing fortunes and global strategies? The answer wouldn't come, only a growing restlessness. I sat on the edge of the bed, and without knowing exactly who I was speaking to, whispered, "If there's something true in all of this, show me." It was a timid, almost embarrassed murmur. But that night, I realized that for the first time I had prayed, not with memorized phrases or rehearsed formulas, but with a bare heart. The rest of the night passed sleepless. There were no visions, no instant answers, but as the sun rose and light slipped through the curtains, I felt a strange lightness. It wasn't joy nor hope. It was as if an invisible door had opened inside me. I didn't yet know what was on the other side, but I knew I couldn't keep living as before. In that hotel room in Kuala Lumpur, for the first time, I began to desire not to regain what I had lost, but to discover what I had never possessed. And that silent thirst, awakened by the words of a stranger driving a taxi, became the first real step towards something I still didn't understand, but that was already transforming me. 3 days passed, and I still couldn't get that taxi driver out of my head. Rahim had become, in a strange way, a quiet presence in my daily life. Every morning when I left the hotel searching for a meeting or a job that never worked out, I looked at the crowded streets and wondered if I would see him again. It was on a rainy afternoon, when the city seemed to sink under the weight of the humidity, that he reappeared. He was leaning against his taxi, chatting with a fruit vendor. When he saw me, he smiled as if he had known I would pass by. "Mr. Adam," he said, "Allah always makes people meet again when there's still something that needs to be said." I laughed awkwardly, trying to hide the curiosity that was taking over me. Before I could respond, he made a simple yet unexpected invitation. "Come with me tonight to the mosque. You don't have to do anything, just listen." Instinctively, I thought of refusing. Me, an American who barely knew what Islam was, inside a mosque in Kuala Lumpur. It sounded absurd, but there was something in his calmness, a kind of conviction that didn't pressure. It was as if he already knew I would say yes, and I did. At dusk, he came to pick me up at the hotel. The sky was painted orange, and the air carried the scent of spices from nearby restaurants. On the way, Rahim told me he had been going to that mosque since he was a boy. He said that every time he heard the adhan, his heart felt realigned with God, as if the entire world stopped for a moment to remember the purpose of life. We arrived just before sunset. The mosque was simple, without luxury, but there was something sacred in the air. The floor was covered with carpets, the dim yellow lights glowed softly, and the respectful silence of the people created an atmosphere I had never experienced before. No motivational speeches, no applause, just serenity. And then it happened. The adhan began. The call to prayer echoed through the loudspeakers, reverberating across the streets and walls, but it felt as though each syllable came from somewhere beyond sound. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Those words, even without fully understanding them, pierced something deep inside me. It was as if my soul recognized what my mind could not yet comprehend. I looked around and saw men standing shoulder to shoulder, regardless of age, color, or social status. There was an absolute sense of equality. No one was above anyone else before God. Rahim placed his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Here, we are all just servants. No titles enter, no wealth matters." As I watched, I realized something I had never seen in any temple or church I had visited before: the absence of ostentation. No pulpit, no images, no intermediaries. Just people and God, a direct connection. No noise, no performance. When the prayer began, the silence between the movements felt almost tangible. The sound of Arabic words blended with the rhythm of breathing, and I felt a peace that disarmed me. It wasn't emotion, it was presence. Something inside me, perhaps the same pride that once made me believe I was self-sufficient, started to dissolve. After the prayer, one of the worshippers approached me and greeted me with a warm smile. No one looked at me suspiciously. No one asked who I was or why I was there. Only acceptance. Rahim handed me a cup of tea and between slow sips said, "When Allah wants to reach someone, He doesn't need miracles. Sometimes a simple invitation is enough." I returned to the hotel in silence. The sound of the adhan still vibrated inside me like a living memory. It was impossible to describe it in words. It was a feeling that mixed reverence and belonging. For the first time in many years, I didn't feel like a stranger in the world. That night I understood that Rahim hadn't just taken me to a religious place. He had guided me to a turning point within my own soul. The taxi had been the first call, the adhan, the second, and something told me that the next step was already being prepared, not by me, but by the one who guides everything. It was an ordinary Friday night in Kuala Lumpur, hot and humid, like so many others. I had decided to accompany Rahim to the mosque again, more out of curiosity than faith. The place was full, and the prayer flowed in perfect harmony. The calm of that moment felt impenetrable, until everything changed. In the middle of the second rak'ah, I noticed a strange sound coming from outside. At first, I thought it was just traffic noise, but soon it became impossible to ignore. Engines revving, hurried footsteps, angry voices. The air grew heavy. One of the worshippers glanced through the window and turned pale. "They're surrounding the mosque," he murmured. In a matter of seconds, the sacred blended with fear. The doors were locked, and the call to prayer continued, steady, unwavering, as if no one inside was willing to retreat. I stood frozen among strangers, my heart beating so loudly it seemed to echo through the walls. The Imam, an elderly man with a white beard and serene eyes, called for calm. "Whoever trusts in Allah does not fear men," he said in a firm voice. The lights flickered, and the metallic sound outside grew louder. Weapons were being loaded. A group of nearly 20 men had surrounded the building, shouting words I didn't understand. Everything pointed to tragedy. Some Muslims began moving the women and children to the back of the hall. Rahim stood motionless, eyes closed. I couldn't comprehend how he remained so calm. And then, the impossible happened. A deep sound tore through the air. It wasn't an explosion or a gunshot. It came from above. The sky, which had been clear moments earlier, filled with dark clouds. The wind began to circle around the mosque, lifting dust and leaves. The attackers hesitated. That kind of wind was not common in Kuala Lumpur. Within seconds, a powerful gust swept across the street, toppling signs, cutting the power, and forcing the armed men to step back. Inside the mosque, the Imam continued the prayer. No one ran, no one screamed. There was an absolute silence, broken only by the rising roar of the wind. And then came the thunder, a crash so loud it made the ground shake. The first lightning bolt struck just a few meters from the attackers, illuminating the scene as if the sky itself had descended to intervene. The men began shouting, confused and terrified. One tried to shoot, but his weapon jammed. Another dropped his rifle in fear. Rahim knelt and began reciting verses from the Quran. I stood there overwhelmed by a mix of fear and awe, unable to explain but deeply certain that something greater than us was present. The storm broke with almost unreal force. The rain fell like a dense curtain, and the wind swirled in spirals that seemed to protect the building. The windows trembled but didn't shatter. Outside, the voices fell silent. The storm had completely isolated the mosque, as if an invisible wall of wind and water had risen around it. The adhan, the call to prayer, began again, now amplified by the thunder. It was as if the entire sky was responding, and in that moment, I realized that no one was afraid. The men remained on their knees, praying, while the world outside seemed to collapse. I didn't know how to pray, but I closed my eyes and simply whispered, "God, if you are here, show me who you are." The words slipped out on their own, almost without my will. And in that moment, an indescribable feeling took over me. Peace. Not the shallow peace of a hotel room or a full bank account, but something alive, intense, real. The storm lasted exactly 47 minutes. When it ended, the air smelled of wet earth and silence. The attackers were gone. No trace of motorcycles, weapons, or footprints remained outside, only the soaked ground, as if the sky itself had washed away the evil from the earth. Rahim walked over and placed his hand on my shoulder. "Now you understand what it means to trust in Allah." I couldn't speak. All I knew was that I had witnessed something that defied every logic, every rational explanation. There was no possible coincidence. That night marked the end of a skeptical man and the beginning of someone who finally started to see the unseen. As we left the mosque, I saw men and women embracing, laughing and crying at the same time. No one had been hurt. Not a single window was broken, and for the first time in many years, I felt that fear no longer lived in me. Something inside had been set free, and I didn't yet know it. But that storm would mark the moment my life stopped being mine and became the work of God. The wind roared like a living creature, and each lightning bolt seemed to cut the sky in half. I remained motionless, caught between terror and wonder. That phenomenon didn't follow any law I knew. It was as if time itself had stopped to witness something sacred. No meteorologist could ever predict what happened that night. Within seconds, the entire street turned into a river of light and sound. The mosque, which should have been the most vulnerable point, stood firm while everything around it dissolved into chaos. The worshippers didn't rise. None of them ran. They stayed kneeling, their foreheads pressed to the wet ground, reciting verses from the Quran in perfect unison, even as the thunder shook the air. I found myself on my knees too, not understanding how or why. It wasn't a logical reaction. It was as if an invisible force pulled me down, compelling me to acknowledge that something infinitely greater than myself was there. The adhan, the call to prayer, began to echo through the gusts of wind. The voice from the loudspeakers was no longer just sound. It was a vibration that moved through the body and heart, speaking directly to the soul. It was impossible to tell what was natural and what was divine, but I knew I was hearing an answer. Outside, the attackers shouted disjointed orders. Some tried to reload their weapons, but nothing worked. One fired into the air, and the bullet ricocheted as if it had struck an invisible barrier. Another tried to flee, slipped, and fell to his knees in the mud, crying for mercy. And while all of this happened, the rain grew heavier, but only over the area of the mosque. Looking around, I noticed the rest of the city was still clear, dry, almost calm. It was as if the sky had chosen that exact point on Earth to unleash its power. A lightning bolt struck just a few meters away, and for an instant, the entire world was bathed in a golden glow. I swear I saw, if only for a second, figures around the mosque, like silhouettes made of light. They were human in form, yet not human. Guardians, I thought, without knowing where that word came from. Rahim, still kneeling, opened his eyes and looked at me. He didn't need to speak. His gaze said everything. "You're seeing what I see." The wind began to circle around the mosque, forming a perfect ring. The trees bent, but did not break. The sounds of the world, sirens, shouts, horns, disappeared. All that remained was the sound of rain and recitation. The Imam's voice echoed, powerful, calm, unshaken. Each word seemed to hold the air in its place, as if the Quran itself were supporting the structure of the temple. Suddenly, a deep calm took over me. The fear dissolved. The thunder became music. The water on my skin was no longer cold. I closed my eyes and heard inside my chest a phrase that didn't come from outside. "This is my sign." I opened my eyes and realized the wind had stopped. The rain continued, but gently, as if it were washing not only the ground but everything I had been until that moment. I looked around. The worshippers embraced. Some cried, others just smiled in silence. The armed group had vanished. No trace, no motorcycles, no weapons left behind. Only the quiet sound of water flowing through the street and the unmistakable smell of wet earth. Rahim stood slowly and helped me to my feet. I was still trembling. He placed his hand on my shoulder and said, "When the Adhan is pronounced, even the wind listens, Adam. Nothing can touch the one who bows before Allah." Those words struck me harder than the lightning that had lit up the sky. Everything I thought I knew about control, power, destiny had been undone in minutes. The man who believed himself master of his own life now stood there, soaked, on his knees, before something that needed no proof of its existence. That night, I felt the weight of a truth no fortune could buy. There are forces that cannot be explained, only recognized. When I left the mosque, the moon was reappearing between the clouds, and the city resumed its normal rhythm as if nothing had happened. But inside me, nothing would ever be normal again. The distant sound of another adhan echoed from a different mosque, and for the first time, those words didn't sound foreign to me. They seemed to call me by name, as if God himself were saying, "Now you have heard me." The hotel room felt smaller that night. The damp walls, the still air, the distant sound of cars, all of it reminded me that despite being in a metropolis, I felt completely alone. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window. The street still glistened with the reflection of the rain that had just stopped. The world went on, indifferent to what I had witnessed, but inside me, something had irreversibly changed. I picked up my phone and opened the local news. No mention of what had happened, no record of the storm, no report of the siege. It was as if that night had never existed. I stared at the screen in silence, trying to convince myself it could have been coincidence, a weather anomaly, a mind under stress playing tricks. But no, what I had seen, felt, and heard could not be reduced to chance. There had been a living presence in that rain, a force that pierced through me and now made me confront myself. I lay down and closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Rahim's words echoed clearly, as if spoken inside my chest. "Whoever has Allah never loses." I repeated it mentally, trying to understand, and the more I repeated it, the more I became aware of the emptiness I had tried to fill with money, travel, achievements, and status. I had lived to be admired, but no one really knew me, not even myself. The tears came without warning. They weren't tears of sadness, but of surrender. It was as if, finally, after decades, pride had collapsed. I thought of all the times I had dismissed people of faith, calling them naive. I thought of how I had mocked those who said life had a purpose beyond logic and profit. Now I understood what they had felt, and realized how arrogance had blinded me. I got up and walked around the room. The city, seen from above, seemed asleep. A strange silence hung there, too deep to be just the absence of sound. It was the kind of silence that speaks, the kind that doesn't demand answers, only surrender. And at that moment, a phrase surfaced in my mind without me forming it. The heart must be broken so God can dwell in it. I sat again and wept, this time with gratitude. It was as if the rain that had fallen outside was now pouring inside me, cleansing everything. The memories of recent years, the betrayals, the losses, the collapse, no longer hurt the same way. All of it, I realized, had been necessary to bring me to this moment. I hadn't lost everything. I had been emptied so I could receive something new. As the sky slowly brightened, I decided to do something I had never done before. I knelt, not out of impulse but out of necessity. I stayed there in silence with no elaborate words, no requests. I simply breathed deeply and said what my heart dictated. God, if you are who they say you are, teach me to know you. The air seemed to change. A subtle peace filled the room, almost tangible. I didn't hear voices, I didn't see lights, but I knew with an inexplicable certainty that I was not alone. That silence was no longer empty. It was presence. That dawn, I understood that faith is not born of miracles, but of surrender. What happened in the mosque opened my eyes. What happened in that room opened my soul. For the first time, the man who built empires realized he no longer needed to build anything. It was enough to let God rebuild what pride had destroyed. And it was there in that small hotel room, between the distant sound of the city and the echo of a rain already past, that my real life began, not with a shout, but with the silence of a heart that had finally learned to listen. In the weeks that followed, something in me changed without any effort. The routine that had once revolved around appointments, meetings, and goals was replaced by something much simpler and infinitely more real. I began attending the mosque every morning. At first I only observed from a distance, sitting in the back, afraid of being an intruder. But no one looked at me with suspicion. No one demanded explanations. Those men, many of them humble, welcomed me with sincere smiles, as if they already knew I was there for something greater than curiosity. Rahim was always waiting at the door, a handshake, an assalamu alaikum, and a look that seemed to say, "You're on the right path." The Imam's sermon spoke of patience, humility, and purpose, topics that once seemed abstract to me but now sounded like direct answers to questions I had been carrying for years. With each word, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a part of my old self falling away. I discovered that Islam was not a religion of fear as I had once imagined, but of balance. There I learned that submission is not weakness, it is liberation. That bowing before Allah does not strip you of dignity, but restores the truth of who you are. Each salah, prayer, became a mirror in which I saw the reflection of a man who no longer wanted to conquer the world. He only wanted to be part of it with purpose and serenity. I began studying the Quran with discipline. The words, even in translation, carried a different weight, a kind of wisdom that didn't seek to persuade by force, but to touch through clarity. Indeed, with hardship comes ease. That verse became the summary of my journey. Everything I had lost was not punishment, it was preparation. It was the path that brought me there, to learn to rely on something greater than myself. The brothers at the mosque welcomed me into their meals, taught me the rituals, the prayers, the pronunciation of the words. I, who once dined at tables of crystal, now sat on the floor sharing bread and rice with humble men, and I felt richer than at any banquet in my old life. The silence after prayer was unlike any silence I had ever known. It was not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. One afternoon, while watching the movement of the city from outside the mosque, I realized something clearer than ever before. My search had never been for money. It had always been for meaning, and for the first time I had found it. In that moment, I understood what Rahim meant. Whoever has Allah never loses. Because even when the world takes everything from you, the Creator gives back the only thing that truly matters, a soul at peace. The 10th day of Ramadan dawned with a different glow. The sky looked clearer, the air lighter, and within me was a calm I had never felt before. I woke early, drank a little water, and went to the mosque without telling anyone what I was about to do. The walk felt shorter that morning, and with every step I sensed that I was approaching not just a place, but a purpose. Rahim was waiting at the entrance, as always. When he saw me, he simply nodded, asking no questions. He knew. We sat side by side on the floor among dozens of worshippers. The Imam began the recitation, and I noticed my heart beating in rhythm with those sacred words. There was no doubt, no fear, only complete surrender, the kind I had always sought in everything but never found anywhere. When the moment came, I rose slowly. My hands trembled, not from nervousness, but as if my whole being understood that something eternal was about to happen. The Imam approached and asked softly if I was ready to declare my faith. I simply closed my eyes and said yes. Those words, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasulullah, left my lips with a power that wasn't mine. Each syllable felt like it was breaking the invisible chains that had bound me to the illusion of control. When I finished, tears streamed down my face. They weren't tears of emotion, but of rebirth. For the first time, I felt I truly belonged, not to a nation, a company, or a title, but to the Creator of all things. The brothers came closer, embracing me in silence, and in that embrace there was more love than in all the applause and contracts I had ever received. Life hadn't become easier, but now it had direction. I was no longer the man chasing fortune. I was the man who had finally found faith. If this story touched your heart, consider using Super Thanks. Your support helps this channel bring stories like mine to more people. Today, my life is simple. I live in a small apartment, wake before dawn to pray, and spend my days helping others rediscover the meaning of faith. There are no meeting schedules, no rush to sign deals, only silence, gratitude, and peace. I discovered that it isn't luxury that gives value to existence, but the constant presence of Allah in every breath. Sometimes I still remember the man I used to be, proud, surrounded by figures and praise, but that reflection fades the moment my forehead touches the ground in prayer. Everything I lost has turned into an invisible gain, serenity, clarity, and a heart free from the weight of illusion. What I found in Malaysia was not just a new religion, but the truth that had always been calling me, even when I pretended not to hear. If this story brought reflection, share this video with others. You might be the bridge that helps someone else find in Allah the answer the world couldn't offer. May every word of this testimony reach those who need to hear that there is still time to begin again. I invite you to watch the next video. There are messages that can strengthen your faith even more and show that Allah continues to guide hearts, even in the most unexpected places.